Hello, I'm Vanessa Harbour, and I am the author of these two books, Safe and Flight, which are both based at the end of the Second World War and published by Firefly Press. I am passionate about the Second World War because of these two people. Now, this is my dad. Now, my dad lied. He was very naughty. He said he was much older than he actually was, so that he could join the army. He first of all drove tanks, and then he became an officer in the parachute regiment and used to jump out of aeroplanes, which was a bit crazy, if you ask me. And this was my mum. My mum was a Wren, and she used to love telling me stories about her time during the war. And it was all those stories that inspired me to know more about the Second World War and become passionate about it. And also, I'm very interested about what happened to children during the Second World War. When we think about the UK, we automatically think about the million children that were evacuated with their schools from big cities to the countryside, where they were fostered and they had to leave their parents and their friends behind. But not everybody went. Some children would have stayed at home, and they might have seen the dogfights during the Battle of Britain between RAF planes and Luftwaffe planes, which would have been a little bit thrilling, I must be honest. But also, at the age of 14, children would have left school. They would have gone to work. Can you imagine that now? Now you have to stay till you're 18. Also, children of 16, and those were the girls of Scouts, Girl Guides and Scouts, they would help out with the air raids, taking messages and being fire watchers, so checking the fires didn't spread. Younger children helped out too, in that they would salvage scrap metal and paper and glass to reuse, a bit like we do today. But they still got to be children. They could play on bomb sites. At home, they'd probably have homemade toys, because precious metal and stuff like that needed to be used in the war effort. They loved books and comics and going to the cinema, because of course there was no TV. They'd listen to the radio instead. What they didn't have to do was suffer the persecution that they did in Europe. Now, that is something that, if we think about Europe, that's what comes to mind. My two main characters, Kizzy and Jakob, both suffered from persecution. And there were millions of children that were murdered by the Nazis at Hitler's instigation. He killed so many Jews and Romani and disabled children. And that's what we often think about in Europe. But there were a lot of children that didn't like what was going on. And they didn't like their countries being invaded, and they didn't like what was happening to their friends. So they helped the resistance right across Europe. And they'd take messages hidden in potatoes in their bags they were carrying. Or, using their innocence. It might be a little girl pushing her doll's pram, and hidden inside, again, might be a message, or might even be a gun. But nobody was going to question that, because it was a little girl pushing a doll's pram. It was so important for them that they wanted to do their bit. Sometimes they would do things like burp in a soldier's face, and that was their resistance. Other times they'd do something slightly more dangerous. They'd walk a pilot who maybe had been shot down from one safe house to the next, because that was their form of resistance. And nobody was going to question a little child walking with a person, because it looked perfectly normal. It looked like a parent or an uncle or walking with a child. It's important to remember how brave all these children are at war times, and war's still happening, and children are probably still being very brave. So let's think about a writing task. I'd like you to write a diary entry, perhaps as if you've been evacuated, or you've been watching a dogfight, or working for the resistance. What would it feel like? What might you see? Put your thoughts down in your diary entry. See what you can come up with. I hope to talk to you soon. Take care.